Okay, this lesson for the Koine Project class will just be a few moments. Ask two questions. They occurred to me in a study while I was discussing with someone who identified himself as a Calvinist, and he was basically asserting the idea that what makes saving faith saving is works. So I was literally collaborating and speaking with him. I've also since then have even gone on a forum of Baptist preachers for the American Baptist Association and have discussed initially with a very scholastic gentleman on there. But in Romans 4:5 and 4:6, I was asking the question about God imputing righteousness without works being outside works. And then I asked the question to the dear man that was identified as a Calvinist. Now, I don't know how much or what he knows about Calvinism, and I certainly didn't presume that he knew a great deal, except he was really emphatic about the idea of what makes saving faith saving is works. So I was wanting to better understand. So I said, well, if by faith, well, let me just read it here. It says in Romans 4:5, I'll read it out, word it out for you here for those of you in the Koine Project class, and then those of you that just want this lesson, maybe you can ask your legalist friend. I don't know of any legalist that can answer it. I don't know of anyone of any theistic tradition, Catholic, Protestant, Judaic, Islamic, occultic, New Age, post-denominational, non-denominational, denominational 1, 2 through infinity. I don't know anyone that can answer it. It seems to be something that's unintelligible when you begin to speak of the righteousness of Christ that God the Father is imputing its continuous action. So it says here, but to the one who's not working, but to the one who is not working. I put that in red because, someone not working, we know that's bad. So I have it in red because that's an alarm. But it says, but is believing upon the one who is justifying the irreverent man, his particular faith is being accounted into righteousness. So the one who is believing upon the one who is justifying the irreverent man, now I've worded this out according to Koine, his particular faith, that is, of the one who's believing upon the one who is justifying the irreverent man, his particular faith is being accounted into righteousness. Now that is being, that's continuous action. And then in Romans 4:6 it says, accordingly, concerning also David is speaking of the spiritual prosperity, that word blessedness in English, it's spiritual prosperity of the man to whom the God, now the God, that's the Father of Jesus Christ, is accounting for himself, that's for his own interest, and its continuous action, righteousness without works. So the two questions I have, and anyone out there that can help me, I can't find any legalist who could possibly answer it, but what's the one work of, let's say we know there's 613 law codes, 253 that correspond to physiology and anatomy of man, 360 negative commands for each day of the 360-day year. We know that in thought, word, and deed, we can keep or commit an infraction against those laws in relationship to God, and in thought, word, and deed, we can commit, even if just it's one infraction, we become a guilty one of all, and that's in relationship to our fellow man. So of all those infinite ways and degrees and variances of deviation from the law that we are capable and more than inclined in the flesh to do, what's one work that when a person works would be necessary to retain this righteousness that God, the Father of Jesus Christ, for himself, for his own interest, is always accounting righteousness without works. So this righteousness that's being accounted always by God the Father of Jesus Christ for his own interest without works. What work is necessary to work to retain it, because most religion on the planet teaches that you have to work some work or works. But let's just name one work to retain the righteousness of Christ that's being accounted righteousness to the man. It says here, the spiritual prosperity of the man to whom the God, the Father Jesus, is accounting for himself righteousness without works. So what's the one work? Just one work. So he, the person identified as Calvinist, would not answer it. And then I said, well, here's the second question, the other side of this question. What's one work of all that myriad of infinite variances of degrees of compliance, thought, word, and deed in relationship to God, thought, word, and deed in relationship to our fellow man, 613 law codes, 253 relationship to parts of our body, 360 negative commands each day of the year. What one, just one of those is required to prove that this righteousness of Christ, that the God, the Father of Jesus Christ, is accounting for himself for his own interest, righteousness without works. So that was it, because the expression righteousness of Christ, which is the manifestation of God's righteousness, which we know is defined by the demonstrable conduct of Christ in thought, word, and deed, called the faithfulness of Jesus Christ, out from whose faithfulness, which includes his faithfulness to fulfill the law, his faithfulness to fulfill all righteousness, his faithfulness to remain obedient unto death, even the death of the cross, his willingness, faithfulness to be cursed and hanged on a tree, to exemplify his character when it says it behooved him, obligated him to meet his obligation that wasn't, the Bible says he restored that which he did not owe, and he died in our place. So this righteousness of Christ and works of irreverent men can't be expressed in the same sentence. And this righteousness of Christ, that God, the Father of Jesus Christ, who for himself, of his own volition and interest, is accounting righteousness for this man who believes and is not working. So those are the two questions. What's just one work required to retain it, this righteousness of Christ, and what's one work to prove it? And to this point, I would just stop here. That's enough, because it's a fascinating question. It left me curious as to why those who constantly advocate that the reality of saving faith and what makes it saving is works, and now they don't tell me even one work that proves that the saving, what makes saving faith saving, is works. They don't name even one. So then I thought, in this text, there'd be a good text to evaluate. And since this righteousness of Christ by God the Father for his own interest is being accounted, always being accounted, for the one who is not working, but rather is believing upon the one who is justifying the irreverent man. And then this is the blessedness of, even David speaks of it, and we couldn't find a more notorious believer in the Old Testament who had all this authority as king and then abused his power. And we know the account of the story, and we know the details of how he illegally took another man's wife. He had her husband killed through a conspiracy, and then he presumed to proceed to father a child, and God stopped that. And then Nathan, the prophet, was sent to intervene and to confront David, and we saw David outraged and even decreeing capital punishment for a man who had authority, money, power, status, so much so that this man took his power and went and stole a lamb that had been raised in a poor man's house, a commoner's house, as a child, a member of the family, and even ate at his table. And this powerful man took it and served it for dinner for his guest at one of his social occasions. And David said, bring that man here, and he would kill him. And then Nathan told him, well, you're the man. So we have The most egregious scenario and episode in the life of a person in the Old Testament, a king that had been anointed for that purpose of reigning. So that was it. Just what's one work that would be touted by religionists who obviously teach a different gospel, which is not another gospel, and they obviously teach something about faith that isn't what the Bible teaches. So I think this would demonstrate it irrefutably and unassailably if they could just name one work requisite to retain this imputed righteousness that the Bible says God the Father is always accounting, always imputing, and then name one work, just one, that would prove that this is true in a particular person's life. So you have a blessed day. Enjoy this lesson. I really need the feedback. I'm curious about it. I'm certain that there's, with all the legalists out there and all the modified messages, which all basically say the same thing, they incorporate works into the equation. They substitute faith, justification by faith, to a works-based standing. But this text is really amazing because if we can easily demonstrate how far surpassing the Bible is and far above, God's thoughts are far above our thoughts, that we could show that in just 2 verses is all I used here, just 2 verses, that if we can't find how to incorporate a work to retain this, since it was imputed without works because the person believed, and it's simple form of action. When you read earlier in the text, Abraham believed, simple form of action, in a moment, not ongoing. And this is what the Bible says, that he is, that particular faith, referring back to that moment, not ongoing action, that moment is being accounted into righteousness. So that's it. Have a blessed day. I'm looking forward to the feedback. It's very essential for me to receive this feedback because it'll be helpful to others that preach the gospel and preach the good news of the grace of God. And by this gospel, we're persuaded to believe Jesus Christ for everlasting life, simple form of action, in a moment, not ongoing action. And we believe what the Bible says about what God, the Father of Jesus Christ, is doing for his own interest, for himself, by accounting, imputing continuously, ongoingly, uninterruptedly. Now, that process is not interruptible, especially speaking of God the Father, into righteousness, imputing this righteousness for the man who simply believes. So have a blessed day. Enjoy this lesson.